Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Society hands us syndromes and stories. These challenges have created a stubborn barrier for women to reach leadership roles, blaming us, not the system, for the struggles we face.
We don't like to make alcohol references because even though we like a wine, we know that 50% of the supermarket now, my made up stats, is non-alcoholic.
Yeah.
But it is a cocktail. This is a cocktail of issues that has led to us really internalizing all of these things that all of us feel and make it feel like it's our fault. And so we wanted to start addressing them.
We are really stoked to be doing this to a live audience. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. We're noobs at this, but we're going to have a great time.
And thank you to the allies in the room. I see a few more men here tonight than we had in Wellington.
Yeah, we love our allies. Let's start with one of the most random syndromes that actually you came up with, Nat, so you introduce it.
Well, I didn't really come up with it. It actually was invented in 1895. Identified in 1895. And it was this really concerning phenomenon that united doctors. Doctors were really freaking out about this, actual medical doctors. And they'd seen...
What are other doctors?
Well, we've got, doctors of philosophy, doctors. But people who are serious medical people were really worried about this influx of primarily women, actually only women they noticed it in, with these really red faces and these clenched jaws and the sweatiness and this grimaces. And while they didn't quite understand what led to it initially, and they were divided on all the different reasons why it might come about, they were actually really united. And there was a lot of articles written and journals written on their grave fears for this syndrome that was afflicting women.
What did they call it?
They called it bicycle face.
All right, okay.
And why did they call it bicycle face?
Dude, well, they called it bicycle face because this is ultimately what happened to women when they were riding their bicycles. This was the time where women started to wear pants. And they're bloomers.
Cut out the corsets.
Yeah, and we would start to bike places. This newfound freedom or transportation. And actually, interestingly, where they were starting to bike to was suffragette movements and trying to get women's rights and the right to vote. And they would bike there. And so this kind of thing started to appear.
Yeah, so 1895 was actually when bicycles became widely available. And at the time, and we have been proven wrong on this by a few power suitors who have garages full of bicycles, but for men at the time, it was seen as another fun toy. They had cars, they had horses, they had all of this stuff. Bikes, great, also fun. But for women, it was the first time that we had freedom of transport and independence to go and organize and meet each other. And that didn't sit very well with those in power.
I mean, men in Lycra biked everywhere too, but it was the women that got this label.
Yeah, well, so many of us today, I imagine, still suffer from bicycle face, but unlike back in 1895, you can rest easy that it is actually just a very normal thing. It's the impacts of exercise on your face.
Yeah, okay. Well,
we're all fine, ladies. We're all fine.
Now let's move on to the OG syndrome. This was one, Nat and I did a speech on the syndroming of women, and this was one that I made Nat remove because I thought it was very inappropriate to talk about on a stage in front of a bunch of people I didn't know. And this was Hysteria. Hysteria was a mental disorder that was attributed to women, and it was found in ancient Egypt and Greece. It was called the wandering womb.
Well, initially at the time, and this was a while ago now, pre-1895, at the time, people believed that our wombs wandered around our bodies like hungry animals. This is true, by the way, which, I mean, we can forgive people back in ancient Egypt and Greece. However, it didn't stay there. So while there's been some recordings of hysteria, this mental illness that women faced that was categorized again by a whole range of emotions, and very, at the time, only women had it. Even in 1748, that was the first time that doctors recognized that men may also suffer from hysteria. However, and I have to read this out because I love it, women were more predisposed to this ailment because of our lazy and irritable nature.
Yeah, it was. I think it was just the uterus and the womb part that
The wandering.
wandering
we've got
of it
some
all.
more. We've got some more
And
to
because
come.
they hung upside down to cure it?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
So, according to one doctor, this is another another fact that I need to read out. Sexual deprivation, sorry, young lady in the room, was often the cause of female hysteria. And to illustrate this one doctor presented a case study of a nun who was affected by hysteria, who became cured only when a very well-wishing barber took it upon himself to pleasure her. So that is how they found out that hysteria
That's disgusting.
may or may not. It's horrifying.
This
It's
is why I
horrifying.
removed it from our keynote speech.
However, on the upside, one of the treatments that we found towards the 1800s was what did I call it? The massaging of certain areas to relieve the hysteria, which did in turn, when you are a doctor and you're having to do this multiple times a day, led to a wonderful invention that many of us may now utilize.
Noted. We'll leave it there because we do have some young ears in the room. But look, I should note, again, it's no surprise that this disorder, this diagnosis, I should say.
Wait, should we give the final cause of it? The witches.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Do the final causes.
Before we come into why it came about. Witches.
Yeah, witches.
This was another big reason initially. So we had the wandering wombs, we've had the sexual problems, deprivation, and then we've got witches, which of course, witches are the source of most issues. And so at the time, sorcery, this led to hysteria being cured with herbs. Sometimes women were punished and purified through fire, also very helpful for witches. And actually, hilariously, I've told this story to my mum, who then went down a Google rabbit hole, which is why women love pockets. Because witches, as we all are, love to store our spells in our pockets.
Yeah.
And so my mother went and Googled that and has sent me multiple articles where she has somehow figured out how to highlight all the different examples of women in pockets and the surprising history of pockets on women's clothes, which to this day is still smaller than men's pockets.
Yeah, it's true.
So anyway, what did this actually get caused by?
Well, this diagnosis...
Because it wasn't witches, because we're still all around.
No. I mean, this diagnosis, ironically, came about just as the same time that women were fighting to gain access to universities and various professions across both the US and Europe. So it is just really interesting that this diagnosis occurred about the same time. Now, it came and went from the mental health manuals not until the 1960s.
Yeah,
so we could still be diagnosed in the 60s with hysteria, and now is recognized as little more than a way to describe and pathologize everything that men found mysterious or unmanageable in women.
Absolutely.
Don't be hysterical.
And the thing that I actually find truly sad about this is some of the studies on this back in the day, and actually up until the 1960s, it was far more associated with women who had a lot of children. So actually hysteria was a very normal response to some pretty awful things, and for it to be lumped under something that was somehow broken because of our lazy and irritable nature feels particularly hard for those women.
Yeah.
So witches unite.
One of the OGs. But we're going to move on to a more common syndrome, which probably many will relate to. Superwoman syndrome.
Yes. Aren't we all? I mean, it's hard because we are superwomen.
Superwoman syndrome is all about trying to do it all and to be perfect in every role. Careers, family, personal aspirations. Women are juggling it all, and we're being labeled for it. It is this impossible quest for perfection.
Yeah, and this is something we talk about it a little bit now, is this idea, and again, hashtag not all men, and hashtag, exceptions apply and all of that stuff. But most of the time in our generation, we were raised in households that were really starting to get this idea that women could do anything. It was really only our mothers who first had that glimmer of, oh, my daughters could grow up and do whatever they wanted. So this whole generation of us were raised to believe we could do anything. However, at the same time, they weren't actively thinking, well, if that's going to happen, then we probably need to raise our little boys to also think that they can and should do anything and step up in other areas of life. So what it's led to is this widespread group of women who feel not only that we can do anything, but that we should do everything.
Yeah, it is interesting because I know we sit on a number of panels and we often get asked this question of how is it that you're juggling everything, particularly for those that are having kids. We know that women take on more non-promotable work. We do more office housework. And then not only that, but we're taking on the burdens of the majority of project management at home as well. And so I often get this question, how are you juggling it all? I can guarantee you my husband never has had that question in his entire life.
And that comes as a really sad side effect too, because we obviously are huge supporters of all of us versus the patriarchy, and we mean men and women, because it doesn't serve any of us. And I think there's something really sad as well about men having children and going back to work with the expectation that they just leave all that at home and that they are somehow managed to just put that in a compartment and move on. And I know there's been some interesting stats come out in New Zealand recently that we have over the last 10 years seen a 400% increase in the number of men who take the full parental leave in this country, which is fabulous. That has gone up from 100 men a year in 2014 to 400 in 2024. And compare that to the over 50,000 women each year who take the full parental leave. So there is a huge systemic issue there that still leads to it being far harder for men to take the leave and far more normalized to women to take the leave. And that's just the very beginning of some of the reasons why the system does lead to some of these things.
But there's also really weird guilt and shame if we're to outsource anything, isn't it? Like if we get cleaners, if we're to delegate or to outsource, there's a sense of like, oh, how privileged are you? When really it's just trade-offs and choices that we make. And there's quite a bit of shame and judgment associated with that sometimes.
Well, it's interesting. I've got two examples of this from recent times, and I think this is something that we should all hold ourselves account to. And I actually mentioned it earlier tonight to a lovely group of women. I had lunch with this incredible woman, and she's hired not a part-time cleaner, but a part-time staff member, a house manager, if you will. So she has a fixed salary. She works part-time for this woman, and she has just given her a list of tasks that weeks to week she would love to get done around the house. She comes and goes as she pleases, like any other employee would. And when she added quite recently folding the washing to the list of tasks she'd love to get off her plate, because she's like, my sanity, my marriage, all of these things rely on this other person who we have now paying, the number of women who push back on her, almost insinuating that she was lazy and irritable, that she actually couldn't handle it all. And I had the same experience the other day. I said to someone, I don't want to meet up today. I needed to have a bit of downtime. And my girlfriend said, oh, I saw her roll her eyes at that. And I was like, interesting.
Okay.
And I was like, this is something that we should really stop doing, because we should really support and embrace the idea that we don't have to do everything. We can just do anything and pick out anything. Which
leads us to another syndrome popularized in New Zealand. Dr. Libby Weaver, is that right?
I don't know.
Yes, Dr. Libby Weaver. I know, because I had a book. I had a book on my bedside table for years, and this was Rushing Women Syndrome. Rushing Women Syndrome describes the stress we feel in our fast-paced life, because many of us are genuinely rushing here, there, and everywhere. And quite often we're experiencing the physiological effects of that, of burnout. We know that that is a thing. And I remember being given this book of Rushing Women Syndrome. Someone must have felt I looked particularly stressed. And it spent 4 years next to my bedside, just collecting dust. And every time I looked at it, I was like, damn it, I need to read that book, but I'm too busy rushing everywhere. And I must have had Rushing Women Syndrome.
I'm so sorry. I have to keep saying this every time that you mention this book, Gathering Dust. Kristen, do you have someone dusting your house on your behalf?
I don't.
Or does it just collect dust?
It just collects dust. But I think I did dust it off one day, and I passed it on to someone who I thought might benefit because they were rushing around. So, I mean, you know, it's gone to a good home. I hope it was read.
We hope someone's read it.
But this is, again, back to that superwoman syndrome of the expectations are so high that we are to do everything, to be everything, that we're suffering physically for it as well.
Yeah, we try and jam a lot in, and as evidenced by us turning up 7 minutes late today to a wine before this. Sorry. And actually, that's one gift we can give to each other is sometimes, like, ideally we're on time. Ideally, we always turn up and have the time. But actually, having someone who says, that's cool, I'll just sit down and pause for 5 minutes can be a real gift to the other people who are schlepping microphones and microphone arms across town.
Exactly. Okay, next one.
Princess Syndrome.
Yes, good one. This
Fabulous one. These are all real, by the way, just in case someone thinks we're making these up. These are all real.
Okay, go. What's this one?
So this is the social expectation that we should focus on our appearance and being passive and likable and attractive to please men. And it's about reinforcing those outdated gender roles, expecting us to be decorative and compliant.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a thing about there's so much pressure on our outward appearance, and it's socialized from a very young age. I even remember my dad and these expectations of wearing a skirt out of the house, for example, and that's what presentable looks like, or brush your hair or whatever. And I know that it was so refreshing when we were in Queenstown and we were at the keynote, which I didn't let you talk about the wandering womb, and we met Robin.
We didn't
Malcolm.
even mention the hanging upside down.
No, we didn't. We didn't.
Don't worry.
We didn't.
You just hang yourself upside down if you need to. The womb gets back into position. We can all mark that down as an action.
And then you're sorted. But we're in our 40s, and Robin Malcolm is not. She's just a touch older, a fabulous Kiwi actress. But she loves being in, what is she embracing? She must be nearing 56,
I actually don't know.
Mid-50s? She looks amazing. And the one thing I noticed with her, chatting with her, was she had nothing done to her face. And I know that, of course, we chat to women who embrace themselves every day, but she is in the limelight. She is in movies. She is on, magazines, you name it. And she is just gorgeous and embracing everything about her. And I know she was up chatting on the stage and just chatting about how she loved being invisible. She actually realized for the first time in her life, I am invisible. And she was like, I love it because I'm sneaking around, I'm doing my thing, and no one notices me, and no one suspects me.
Isn't that funny how socialized we are to want that attention, that the idea of being invisible? Because you do hear about it becoming invisible after a certain age, that feels really soul destroying, whereas actually, gosh, how wonderful is it to be able to just be unnoticed and to be able to go and cause havoc wherever we want.
I know.
No one's paying attention. It's brilliant.
But I did love it. I love that she was it's always amazing to have these models going before you, particularly those that are owning it and owning themselves in their space, and to kind of embrace that, I think, is amazing.
I love it. She also has done some fabulous stuff. If you haven't followed her, look into her, because her latest TV show, After the Party, that was actually designed, she called it kitchen porn. This idea of women in TV after a certain age or in movies are always in their kitchen looking nice and sort of motherly, and they just love their kitchens and their baking. And she was just like, blow this up. Let's create women who are sort of likable, but maybe not likable, who are flawed, who are aggressive, who are assertive, who are problematic. And when you see that show, you really start to realize, oh my goodness, we never see this. We just see these lovely ladies in their kitchens.
Yeah, she's rad. That's a great show. Now, Princess Syndrome moves on very nicely to Good Girl Syndrome. And this one I can relate to, because this is very much about the pat on the head we get when we please others, that we avoid conflict because that's uncomfortable. It's about putting everyone else's needs before our own. And again, this Good Girl Syndrome is seen as a flaw rather than a response to the pressure we feel to fit in.
Yeah, I have an example of this because it's actually grating me at the moment. I know this young 7-year-old who is exceptionally bright, intelligent, fast-moving, clever, everything. She goes to school, and when she finishes her schoolwork first and does a really great job, do you know what happens to her? She gets handed more stuff. So it's like, you can now take on this extra responsibility. Good girl. Please do the teacher's chores for her. And please take the mail up. And please do this. And please do that. And it's seen as this real pat on the head of, you've done so well. Yeah. Do more.
Yeah, she's already that psychological trigger is happening already, isn't it?
Yeah,
like
and it's
pleasing.
taught. Yeah. It's like you are taught from that age. You do well as a girl. Please, like, you'll get the pat on the back and you'll get handed more stuff.
Well, I still think it's this weird, also dads. I mean, I don't know if other people can relate. Like, there's a thing around wanting to please ultimately dads, for those, that remember that or had them in our households. They were somewhat removed, but they were there and they were serious and they were stern. And when you did well in school, the report cards got sent to my grandparents. But when I didn't do well, those report cards went missing. It was like this whole...
Did you ever get a bad report card?
Yeah, Kristen was easily distracted.
That is so unsurprising. Do you know what? As an adult, I have told so many people that I was a teacher's pet and the teachers loved me. And I think I texted you because Mum kept all my reports. I went through them. The teachers hated me.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't have
that's you.
I have great self-belief.
What's the thing where you think you're like amazing?
Yeah, that's me. I'm the opposite.
But what is it? It's like a thing. It's a syndrome. You've got a syndrome.
I honestly thought I was like an amazing student. And then when I read those reports, I was like, what's wrong with these teachers? That was incredible.
Honestly, I think this good girl syndrome is a thing. Can people relate? Hands up for those that relate. Yeah, there's a few hands. There's just this weird thing. And I don't know.
We get it. You get told you're a good girl.
Yeah, I still remember getting a star as a child. Like that star that you got on your shirt and you're just like, oh my goodness. It's that being noticed. It's the feeling special. Okay, now we get to the biggie. This is the big one. And it's one that we speak about quite a bit. Actually, it's one that's just been completely normalized in our language today.
Should we ask if people have it or if they can guess
anyone
what
guess?
It is?
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Who's called themselves an imposter? Go on, it's been more than that in the room. Go on.
Let's reframe the question. Who's experienced imposter syndrome?
Yeah. Very
it all
good.
matters.
Yeah, fair,
how you
fair,
ask
fair,
the
fair.
question matters.
If anyone doesn't know the story of this, it came about in the 1970s. There was a professor at a U.S. university who started to notice this really strange phenomenon among her female students. These are PhD students, incredibly brilliant, and before every exam or right after every exam, they would be certain that they failed. These were incredibly intelligent, bright women who'd never failed before. And so this teacher got really curious and started to notice this, talked to a colleague, got her to come and sit with all of these women. And eventually after a chat, they discovered that these women all felt they labeled themselves as imposters in this world, in this prestigious university. They were surrounded by men and they were just waiting to be found out as frauds. So these two professors subsequently went on and they spent a year interviewing women. I think they interviewed about 150, and they found that it's a phenomenon of successful people, first of all, and that they never felt that they deserved that success. They always felt as though they were going to be found out. So they did this research paper. It got overlooked for years. They called it imposter phenomenon, and no one would publish this paper. Eventually someone did, but then something interesting happened in the 90s, and that was the rise of the self-help book. And for anyone who went into a bookstore and is old enough to remember this, reams of self-help, it switched between that and social media. It switched from phenomenon to a syndrome. And now it was a label that women, particularly, because I think 75% men, 85% women have experienced this, 90% women of color have experienced this, and it flipped to a syndrome. So no longer was it this sense of I am experiencing a very normal feeling into an actual something is wrong with me, and oh no, I am an imposter.
Yeah, and I think as the way you ask a question matters and words matter, and I think a phenomenon is a widely spread impact that affects people. A syndrome is something broken with you. And so I think when we switch those words around, we really did a disservice. And I don't know if it was the makeup industry or the self-help industry or whatever, but somewhere along the line, a lot of money was made out of switching those two words around. And I think it's a real shame because going into a situation and calling yourself an imposter is a pretty rough thing to do to yourself because you aren't an imposter. And it was interesting. I was telling my father about doing these Power Up Lives, and he at some stage got a huge promotion. He got the top job in a big government department, and he was nodding along saying, I felt like a real imposter. And what it is it's when you have achieved more than you could have imagined in life, and a lot of us, the affliction of the high achieving, end up in this situation, and you are sitting there going, how I still see myself as 7-year-old girl getting told she's a good girl because she's whatever, and suddenly I'm in this position. And the biggest antidote, and I tried it on Dad so it works for men too, is I said, when you looked around though, who was better for the job? And he was like, I actually can't think of anyone. And one of the things we often say to power suitors is, if not you, who?
Yeah.
And Courtney Johnston, who we had, CEO of Te Papa, incredible, join Power Suit and you'll get to listen to her. She's a phenomenal person. She actually changed that, and I like her wording more. She applied for the job and she said, if not me, better than me. And I loved that as a way of reframing it, because when you're looking around, it's so easy to fall into that trap of going, why me? But reframing it, why not me? Who's better? And what easiest way to shortcut that spiral? Because of course, I mean, we came through security at the airport today and the guy's like, what are these giant things in your bag? Are you a podcaster? And I'm sitting there going, no, what? And look at us now. Like, we're in this, and a year ago, 76 eps ago, when we decided to start doing this, we both went, why us?
If we think about it, women entered the workforce in the 70s. Anyone been cold in their offices before? Office cold? Office temperatures are set to 5 degrees colder than what's comfortable for women. We know that the chairs and tables, anything ergonomic, isn't ergonomic to our frames. We know anyone who watched COVID, those were horrific scenes watching the doctors, female doctors, women doctors that could not fit the face masks and had masking tape, PPE gear. Anytime you go to a construction site, you won't find a women's toilet. Like, these are issues that these workplaces and these environments weren't designed with us in mind. And so sometimes we are genuinely navigating as imposters.
Oh, when you are the first or only in a room, or you're wearing equipment that doesn't fit, the whole world is telling you don't belong.
Yeah.
And we have to somehow fight that and realize that it is a systemic issue and not our issue. And we asked everyone to put their hands up, because one of the nicest things is looking around and going, if 85% of us feel it, 90-something% women of colour, this isn't something broken within individuals.
Yeah.
This is something that a systemic issue has created.
Okay, so we've covered off these wild and wonderful world of made-up syndromes. So what unites some of these made-up afflictions?
Well, Kristen.
Do tell.
They always seem to either solely or disproportionately impact women. There's not, I'm trying to think, and I'm putting myself on the spot, there's not too many syndromes I've heard of that are as many that are thrown at men.
No, there aren't really. Or at least
Superman syndrome.
Superman, is
I
there
don't know
a thing?
if that's one. I don't know. You can adapt Superwoman.
I mean, maybe. We'll keep an eye.
And imposter syndrome definitely is felt. But they do seem to disproportionately impact women.
And the second thing is they have cropped up just as women are making progress. So something to consider there.
Absolutely. We are going to finish with the quote corner and a couple of actions.
Yes.
And then we're going to turn over and look at everyone.
This is a quote from Coco Chanel, and I actually like her. She didn't identify as a feminist, but no doubt there would have been really strong connotations to do that. And so sometimes you're like, public image, I'm not going to. However...
Is that anti-feminist syndrome?
Probably. It probably is something, but she was the bomb, and she had a lot of great sayings. But this one I loved for this podcast. A girl should be 2 things: who and what she wants.
Love it. So a couple of actions. We don't normally do this on our podcast, but we are fans of small actions that take us one step forward or help us address limiting mindsets or reframe a thought or take an experimental approach to changing something in our lives for the better and taking control over our lives and our careers. First one.
Did we do a podcast on saying sorry?
Yeah, well, we talk about it a lot.
Okay.
I was fighting it on the plane today. I was in the middle seat, and every time I had to, because I had to lift out the tray, and I was like, don't say sorry, because of course the guy, and I was like, don't say sorry, and then I was like, sorry, and I was like, ah!
Okay, well, we are asking all of you not to say sorry. If you bump into someone or into a table, or you want to get past someone, fight the urge to apologize. We do not need to be sorry for navigating this world.
Absolutely. And if you find yourself wobbly or uncertain or stretching out of your comfort zone, putting yourself in a position that feels unfamiliar, maybe a little bit nerve-wracking, instead of labeling yourself an imposter, pat yourself on the back and give yourself a compliment for stretching, because that is very impressive.
Amaze. Thank you so much for joining this special live recording, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.